Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Exposed in Faith, where we talk about how the Lord uses convictions to grow us in the faith. And additionally, more recently, I have been talking about the Bible as I've been walking through it, just talking about things that stand out to me or like different revelations that come up. So yeah, welcome back. I hope you stay for a while. So today we're going to be in Leviticus, specifically Leviticus 18, because my study today was Leviticus 17 through 20. The book of Leviticus essentially is all the laws and regulations that are placed for God's standard of holiness. So a lot of it deals with that. Well, all of it deals with that, specifically the standard of holiness that is expected from the Israelites, and God just lays it all out. As I was reading through chapter 18, it reminded me of a time back when I used to go to a group through my church, and I don't know what we were discussing about the Bible, but we were talking about the Bible. I think we were talking about current events and what was going on in the media and how bad things were. And I remember just being like, if we compare it to the biblical times, like, things are really not that bad. Things are really not that bad. Things were far worse, especially in the Old Testament. Oh my goodness. Some events that come to mind immediately: Abel and Cain, like, they were just unaliving each other left and right. There was no decorum. Men were being very carnal and sexually driven. They were doing whatever. And the text that came to mind specifically during that discussion was, I believe it's 1 Corinthians. Hold on. I honestly should have prepared before getting on here these texts. But the thing is, I have noticed that when I take notes before I come here, I blank out. I have learned that I have to let the Spirit just flow through me, and whatever comes while I'm speaking is what comes. And it's funny because I will think that I'm not making sense, or I'm blabbing, and sometimes I don't make sense, and sometimes I am blabbing. But when I go back to edit these videos, they tend to have a thread of logic. It turns out that I was making sense, and actually I was saying exactly what I wanted to say. So I'm just trusting the flow of the Spirit. But I believe it is 1 Corinthians 3, when Paul was addressing the unrighteous sin that was happening in the church. Okay, yeah, so it's 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 1. It is actually reported that there is a sexual... Please hold. Despite all the noises and the interruptions, I do enjoy feeling outside. I think being in nature inspires me a little bit more. Anyways, so 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 1. It is actually reported that there is a sexual immorality among you, and of a kind that is not tolerated even among pagans. For a man has his father's wife. So this is the text that came to mind in that conversation when we were discussing it. That got me to thinking, like, things are actually not that bad for us in today's times. Now, obviously, I don't intend to rate struggles. I think the sufferings of every age is valid according to the age we're living in. We are not used to the extreme carnality that was happening in the Old Testament times. We're not used to that. We don't live in a society where you can just unalive anyone you want. We don't live in a ruleless society. So it would be out of place for that to occur. But in the Old Testament days, like, that was a normality. People were able to act as they pleased, when they wanted, as they wanted. And that was even part of why God instituted laws and regulations. If we go to Genesis 11, the building of Babylon and the hindrance that God placed there, a lot of that had to do with the fact that they were getting too ahead of themselves. They were getting too powerful. Like, the people on top were never going to stop. They were going to do whatever it took to get to the top. They were going to slay everyone below them. The strongest, it was literally survival of the fittest. Yeah, seemingly it was an effort to get society to reach God. But if we really think about and consider if these people wanted to get to God at all costs, that included the lives of those who were weaker than them, which Genesis 11, I have a whole conviction surrounding that I will be diving deep into. I do want to prep that one though, because that is a little bit more detailed than just, I think it's necessary that I prep and organize my thoughts on that. I lost my train of thought going on that rant. But for Paul to say that even the pagans who did any and everything, like in Leviticus, in I believe Leviticus 20, it talks about how God literally had to forbid them from sacrificing their children to a pagan god. Like, these are people who had no decorum. They had no sense of decorum. And so for Paul to identify something that was happening within the church as something even the pagans wouldn't do, like, it had to be bad. And if we think about divorce and how divorce came about and why it was instituted, it was because of the lack of concern for women in marriages. Like, the men were doing any and everything. They were doing a lot. They were oppressing the women so desperately. The God, through Moses, instituted divorce as a form of protection. We do not experience that. Our world is just not that. We have rules and regulations. We have legal systems. We have governance. Even marriage. Men cannot do what they want. There are protections in place. We're not getting unalived because somebody, well, to some extent it's happening, but I was gonna say, we're not getting unalived because somebody feels like doing it. That does happen, but it is not the norm. It's not gonna happen on a random Tuesday. Well, oh my gosh, you guys know what I mean. Like, it does happen on random Tuesdays, but like, that's just not the norm. It's just not the norm. Sexual immorality, the rampant sexual immorality that existed in the Old Testament times, does not exist. Imagine God literally had to forbid the Israelites from sleeping with animals. Do these things occur in today's day and age? Yes, but they're not normal. They're not norms. In our lifetime, we actually are experiencing a lot of privilege. The freedom we experience in today's world was unimaginable even a couple hundred years ago. If we think about trad wives, when they were actually a thing, when women couldn't work, we're living pretty well. Like, we all have access to the same economic and financial opportunities. There are some things that come into play. There are some inequities that do exist. We're not going to act like everything's perfect. We don't live in a perfect world, but we're pretty well off. Yeah. Today's lesson got me reflecting on that again and just being grateful, but also like, wow, like the things that were happening in the Old Testament times. Oh my gosh. Anything you can think of that is bad in today's world, you could probably multiply it by 10. Like, think of it at its worst in the Old Testament times, even in the New Testament times, even like 10 years ago. So I think that's it. Quick little video, quick little rant, quick little chat about what stood out today for me. That's gonna be it. I'm gonna go ahead and leave you, not for long, hopefully. It's really the editing. The editing is what gets me every time. These 10 to 15 minute videos, they take me hours to edit, but for the Lord, please like, comment, subscribe. Please comment. Y'all never comment. I always ask you guys to comment, but y'all never comment. I would love to have dialogue around these things, these topics. Hopefully as the channel grows, eventually that will come. But if you do decide to share, I would love to read any thoughts and opinions and whatever you have for me. I would love to read and conversate about it. I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye guys.